Joining me now is someone who will be in the audience for President Zelensky's address to Congress. It's Colorado Democratic Senator Michael Bennet. He's a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, so he comes to this interview with more knowledge than perhaps he's allowed to share. Senator Bennet, let me start with the expectations. You know what Zelensky's going to come ask for. There's going to be an emotional aspect to it. Look, he addressed you guys before, and suddenly it got more people motivated to do more. Immediately Russia off the SWIFT system, things like that. Do you expect a fervor to increase after hearing from Zelensky tomorrow to do more than perhaps the Biden administration's ready to do?
Chuck, thank you very much. I think the words you used earlier for now are important words. This is a conflict that unfortunately is probably not going to be over soon. It's a conflict that minute by minute by minute, the commander-in-chief and the rest of us who have a role to play here are going to have to make decisions about how we aid the Ukrainian people in the most profound way at a moment when they are in desperate need, and at the same time don't enter into World War III with Russia, or at least don't enter into it inadvertently or prematurely. So I expect to hear President Zelensky tomorrow call for more sanctions, to call for a no-fly zone. We've heard him do that today with the Canadian Parliament. He was very moving the other day on Zoom with us on a Saturday, where he started the meeting by saying, you know, we're fighting here. Let me tell you what this is about. We're fighting here to live our lives the way you live your life. And he ended it by saying the world should live in peace. The world should be as liberal as possible, by which he meant, you know, as plural as possible. Freedom of speech, freedom to assemble, the right to self-determination. And that's what's at stake here, is democracy in the free world. And we've got to make sure we do everything we can for the Ukrainian people, but we've got to be aware that we don't want to inadvertently start World War III.
Well, this is what puts this conflict, though, in a different, you know, take Saudi Arabia and Yemen and the Houthis. When we say that's a regional conflict, I think a lot of people, yes, okay, we see that. That's a regional proxy war between the Iranians and the Saudis. We have interest there, and it's a pretty easy line to draw. Do you talk about this conflict not in a regional term, that this is Putin may be trying to play this off as a, hey, this is our region, this has nothing to do with you, but don't you view this as Putin's war against the West?
This is Putin's war against the West. The President Zelensky called him a butcher on the call we had with him, and that is an apt description of what he's doing. I mean, Chuck, you know, my mom and her parents were living in Warsaw. The last time there was a war in Europe in the 1930s and the 1940s, I had dinner with her the other night. She survived, and they came to the United States after the war was over. She said, I can't believe I've lived long enough to see another war in Europe. But of course, just as it did then, this war is about the entire world. This war is about whether humanity is going to live in freedom and democracy, or live in subservient in a totalitarian state. This war is about whether in the 21st century, you know, it's okay for one country to invade another and to attack and to kill the people in another country just because they seek their own self-determination. So the stakes could not be higher, and we have to be extremely, extremely committed to making sure that we are defending the Ukrainian people in a way that is most productive to them, and making sure that that when this is all over, that this is a world that's defined by democracy, not by totalitarianism.
Hey, Senator, I want to play something that the Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell said earlier today. It may be somewhat partisan, but there's a version of this argument I've heard on both sides of the aisle. Take a listen.
Last week, President Biden publicly split from our ally Poland and scrapped a plan to get airplanes to Ukraine, because our administration feared it might, you guessed it, provoke Putin. Predictably, Putin has not pulled his punches as a thank you to President Biden for pulling his punches. American strength is not the provocation. American weakness is. We need to help get air defense systems to Ukraine without wasting another second.
So look, and the reason I said, look, that was a pretty that on one hand, that was a pretty partisan hit. On the other hand, I've heard plenty of subtle critiques from Democrats saying, you can't let Putin decide the rules of engagement here all the time. And it looks as if we have.
I don't think you should let Putin decide the rules of engagement ever. But giving going to the floor and giving a speech without any regard to whether or not, you could set off World War III, not that McConnell's doing it, because everybody knows those are just words, is serious. And he is not the commander-in-chief. He doesn't have the responsibility. You mentioned earlier on the Intelligence Committee, I can't talk about some of the things that we talk about there. We have talked about things about, what would be viewed as escalatory, what would not be viewed as escalatory. What would it mean for Putin to have a false flag around chemical weapons and what that would look like in terms of what the response? So far from having Putin make our decisions for us, we should have resolve. We should make decisions based on what we think are in the best interest of the Ukrainian people and of the United States of America's national security and our allies. And we should not take any tool off the table, no military tool off the table, no diplomatic tool off the table. Around this place now, I'm sure these signs of weaknesses, some of these things are signs of strength too. Being able to engage your allies in a meaningful way to cripple the Russian economy, that's a sign of strength. And there were people a week ago who said it wasn't enough. Everyone becomes an expert here, when something like this happens. And it's like, because somebody read one book on Afghanistan, like the old, that old article in The Onion was about. So I think, I believe we should be pushing as hard as we can push. We shouldn't take anything off the table. And every single one of us that has a position of responsibility here needs to keep an eye on what it would look like to have two superpowers with nuclear weapons engaged in World War III. And that is not an excuse not to act. It's an excuse to act smart. It's an excuse to act with courage, and it's a reason for us to be so inspired by what the Ukrainian people are doing, because I guarantee you this, none of this would be happening if the Ukrainian people weren't doing what they're doing. And it's an amazing thing to see.
They have been the backbone of the West. That is for sure. Senator Michael Bennet, Democrat of Colorado, really appreciate you coming on.